Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the game between the Sharks and the Blackhawks, in which the Sharks managed to win 7-3. And if you watched the first 5 or so minutes of this game, you probably would not have thought that this game would end by such a wide margin in favor of the San Jose Sharks, because the Blackhawks scored the first 2 goals, one from DeBrincat, one from Dylan Strome. It was then the Sharks. They did manage to come back at that point. Melker Karlsson and Marcus Sorensen, some unusual suspects there to tie the game up. But it was the Blackhawks who got the one that broke the tie. Again, it was Perlini. And so the Blackhawks led 3-2 at the end of the first period. And a first period that wasn't dominated by either team, but was mostly the main thing that you could take out of it was that the goaltending was not very good for either side. However, once the second period came along, the Sharks began to take over, and we saw why the Blackhawks are one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the entire National Hockey League. This team was just so bad defensively. They left up so many holes in the offensive zone that even while the Sharks weren't actually playing that well in general tonight, I felt like this was not one of the Sharks' best games of the season. It was still okay. They gave up a few too many offensive opportunities to the Blackhawks the other way in terms of odd man rushes and things like that and good chances. And while, as I said, the Sharks were decent offensively, I really feel like it was just the Blackhawks were just giving them so much room to actually make anything happen, that the Sharks got goals from Evander Kane, Barclay Goodrow, Logan Couture, Kevin Labanc, as well as Tomas Hertl to win 7-3. First thing I'd like to talk about is the goal from, the play of both Martin Jones as well as Aaron Dell. Of course, Martin Jones was pulled in this game after he let in those 3 goals. Aaron Dell stepped in on the Blackhawks side. Crawford got injured, and so Cam Ward stepped in. That was after the Sharks had already scored 2 goals on Crawford. Jones was not very good in this game at all, actually. He was quite bad, and Jones has been quite solid for the past few games, actually. He hasn't really had a game that you can point to that was particularly poor. He had a couple of soft goals in some of them, but still was, in general, all around quite solid. Tonight was definitely not the case. A very soft one against DeBrincat goes in the first couple of minutes. Not a good way to start a game, especially against a team like the Blackhawks, although the Sharks recovered well. Then he had a pretty soft one against Strome. It was tipped in, but I feel like he could have possibly had it. And then as well another relatively soft one from Brandon Perlini, that while it wasn't entirely Jones's fault, which I'll get to a bit later on in this video, as you can see, it was still something that you'd hope Jones would have been able to play a lot better. And so I definitely agree with DeBoer's choice to actually bench Martin Jones in this game and put in Aaron Dell, and it definitely ended up working out because Dell was fantastic. As I said, the Sharks gave up a few offensive opportunities to the Blackhawks in terms of odd man rushes and even breakaways, and Aaron Dell was up to the challenge on every single one. He did not let in a goal in this game, even though the Blackhawks scored 3, because all 3 were on Jones. And so Dell, who didn't start, ends up getting rewarded with the W because he ends up coming into this game while the Sharks were trailing, and he was in the nets when the Sharks made this comeback. So definitely a great game for Aaron Dell. It'll be interesting to see which of the 2 goaltenders will get the start when they play the Minnesota Wild on Tuesday. If I had to guess, if I was a betting man, I'd probably go with Martin Jones at this point, but I guess it's technically possible Dell gets the start. Next, something I would not think I would have been saying at any point this season during a Sharks victory. In a Sharks loss, I feel like I may have said that as sort of to pile on how bad of a night it would be for the Sharks. But in the Sharks victory, I did not think I'd be saying this. But the 4th line was probably the best line for the Sharks tonight. Hertl, Couture, Meyer was okay. Kane, Pavelski, Donskoy was Sorensen, Thornton, Labanc was pretty good, but the 4th line actually really got a lot generated. They have the goal from Melker Karlsson, they have the goal from Goodrow. Radill himself had a couple of very, very good chances. Karlsson even had a couple of very good chances after the goal. Goodrow was quite solid, and so the 4th line for the San Jose Sharks, they've been quite good in these past few games. Radill had his first NHL goal and everything like that. He had his first NHL assist. But this was really a fantastic game, and it was against a team like the Blackhawks, so it's not necessarily the biggest sign. It's not like it was against like the Lightning or the Flames or the Jets or some great team like that, where it shows that the 4th line is competing with other teams' 4th lines that are the best in the league. But it was still a good sign moving forward for these 3 players. Next is Marc-Edouard Vlasic, and this is an important one. I don't think Vlasic as a whole had a bad game, all around, but we saw one play in this game, which was on one of the goals, the Perlini goal, where it was sort of like the amalgamation of what Vlasic has had troubles with in this season. And it wasn't bad luck, it wasn't a bad bounce or anything like that. It was just a lack of effort from Marc-Edouard Vlasic. So the play starts out, Perlini's trying to bust through for a breakaway. Braun and Vlasic are right on his tail. And so Vlasic drops back to not cover, it was Sikora, I guess, on this breakaway, not Perlini. But so you think he's just giving it to Braun, Braun, you cover that guy, I'll get the guy who's trailing Perlini. But Vlasic doesn't just drop back on Sikora, he drops back just completely. It's like he basically stops skating, he just starts coasting. And so Perlini's able to easily just skate by him and get to this rebound first. And so it was just a complete lack of effort from Marc-Edouard Vlasic. And, for defensive defensemen, it's harder to find good plays because obviously they aren't as flashy as if you're scoring a goal like a Brent Burns. Most of the time your good plays are just good defensive plays that aren't super easy to notice unless you are absolutely fantastic. But the thing is about Vlasic in the past couple of years, when he's been considered one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL, it was so difficult to even point out misplays from him. That's how good he was. But this season, there is definitely no lack of misplays in these first close to half of this season. I mean, yeah, some are bad luck, some are bad bounces, but he's also just made a lot of careless turnovers, a lot of careless moves. He's just not sometimes keeping his feet moving, and he's going to be a very important player moving forward because while you have obviously all-stars on your defensive core like Brent Burns, like Erik Karlsson, those are all-star offensive guys. When it gets to, let's say, in the playoffs and you're playing against, a Goodrow and Monahan top line for the Flames or a Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl top line for the Edmonton Oilers, you want Vlasic and to a lesser extent Justin Braun on the ice to cover those guys. And if Vlasic is not playing at his usual solid level, the Sharks are going to have issues holding off those top lines from these top teams. So it was okay in the end tonight against the Blackhawks, but when they get to the better competition, the Sharks need to hope that Vlasic will rebound and will put in a better effort than he has been at times this season. Finally, a last comment here about the officiating. It was not great in this game. Of course, many will remember probably the most egregious missed call in this game was on Kevin Labanc. He takes a high stick to the face, a very bad one actually, definitely starts bleeding, needs to go for stitches and everything like that. This would have put the Sharks on an extended 5-on-3. I think it would have been like maybe 100 seconds of 5-on-3, as well as then 2 minutes of power play after that, because double minor and such. But they decided to not call it, even though it seemed as though the linesman was basically looking right at it. And I'm sure there was a referee outside the zone looking right at it, but they decided not to call it. The Sharks do end up scoring on this very same power play. That was the Evander Kane goal, if I'm not mistaken. So it didn't end up biting them, as they still won 7-3 as well. But still, and it wasn't even just for the Sharks, let's say, against the Sharks. It looked like Joe Thornton got a bit of a hook onto Brandon's side when he was coming in for the breakaway when he didn't actually get the shot through. Refs decided not to call that either. Timo Meier got a penalty at some point in this game for a trip on Duncan Keith. It definitely didn't look like a trip, at least to me. And so the officials had some issues in this game, dishing out missed calls and everything like that. But and again, it didn't really end up mattering in the grand scope of things. The Blackhawks special teams this season are 31st in the league in both power play and penalty kill. We saw the reason why they're 31st in the league in both of those regards. So the special teams didn't really play a huge role in deciding this game. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action, as I said, Tuesday against the Minnesota Wild. And this is going to be some key points. The Wild are competing for a wild card spot, and it seemed earlier on in the season that it was going to be the Central Division claiming both wild card spots. People, including myself, were calling the Pacific Division probably the worst division in the NHL, because at that point it looked like it was the Sharks who were doing okay, the Flames who were doing okay, and then the Golden Knights were struggling, the Oilers were struggling, the Canucks were struggling, the Coyotes were struggling, the Kings were struggling, the Ducks were struggling. So it really looked like there were just two possible teams for that top spot in the division. But, a month or so later now, we're looking at a team like the Ducks, who haven't really lost in regulation recently. The Oilers, ever since they fired McClellan and brought in Hitchcock, they've been very, very good. The Golden Knights have rebounded very well. The Calgary Flames, I think their only loss recently is to the Oilers themselves. And now, of course, the Sharks are also doing very, very well. And previously, if the Pacific Division had continued not playing well, the Sharks could have probably found themselves first place with this nice little 6-1 run, or I think it's 6-1 at this point, this nice little 6-1 run that they have been on. But because the Pacific Division has now all of a sudden recovered very, very strongly, the Sharks find themselves in a pretty heated playoff race, and it seems as though two Pacific Division teams will be the ones to take the wild card spot. But as we saw earlier this season, anything can change rather quickly in the NHL. We're not even halfway through this season, so it's definitely going to be a bloodbath all the way to game 82. Class dismissed.